right, with that, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today as we discuss the findings from our most recent study published by MDRC under the title Aiming Higher. My name is Katie Comerford, and I am the Executive Director of Higher Achievement Richmond. I'm joined today by Jean Grossman, Senior Fellow with MDRC and Principal on this particular work, who will discuss the key findings of this study. Lindsay Wood Jeffries, our CEO at Higher Achievement, who will explain how this data has already impacted our work at Higher Achievement. And Andrew Dare, Dean of the School of Education at Virginia Commonwealth University, who will lay out how this study and others like it impact the youth of Richmond specifically. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. So please keep your mics on mute. Our very own Jessica Mullery is going to be driving our slides today. So thank you, Jessica. And there will be two separate opportunities to ask questions. You can send those questions to me in the chat, or when the time comes, you can unmute and ask the questions yourself. As a follow-up to this discussion today, everyone will receive a link to download the full report at your leisure. Now, as we get started, we would love to see who else is with us. So please introduce yourselves in the chat. Light it up, as they say. I'd love to see who's with us. And when we see those names come up in the chat, and when I look at the names of all the folks who registered with us today to come, what we see are the names of some of the people who have been supporting Higher Achievement since before we even came to Richmond in 2011. After serving Washington, D.C. for about 35 years, Higher Achievement expanded to 3 new cities, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and beautiful Richmond. Locally, we were part of a key strategy in the broader Middle School Renaissance Initiative. Altria granted Higher Achievement the startup funding to get off the ground and the ability to garner the support of so many people on the call today. The legacy of that initiative is seen not only in the report that we're going to share, but in the mayor's out of school time expansion efforts and the success of our colleagues in the out of school time space. Thanks to everyone who has supported this program over the years. And thanks to all of that support, we now operate 3 achievement centers hosted at Binford, Bouchal, and Henderson Middle Schools. For those of you who are just learning about Higher Achievement, we focus on the critical transition of early adolescence, the multi-year, rigorous, supportive mentoring and academic enrichment. We are preparing middle school scholars for admission into competitive college track high school programs. Our aim is to ensure that 95% of our scholars graduate high school on time and ready for success. More broadly speaking, we uproot racial inequity by closing the opportunity gaps that otherwise turn into staggering racial achievement gaps. We know that talent is everywhere, but sadly, opportunity is not. By showering our scholars with the learning opportunities, we help our scholars achieve. Over time, this work contributes to the development of our increasingly diverse nation. It helps to support economic growth in entire communities and increases the likelihood of financially secure and independent households, truly thriving adults. The achievement gaps widen in the middle grades, and we know how to solve it, but investment is limited. Aside from infancy, neurological development is greatest in early adolescence. Middle schoolers are wired for risk-taking and peer approval. Synaptic pruning is allowing the brain to eliminate any unused connections, which starts to really cement self-identity. We also know that in 6th grade, ABCs are so important: attendance, behaviors, and course grades. We can predict high school graduation with all of these indicators. Yet there is a leak in the support pipeline. In middle grades, schools struggle to retain teachers, and there's limited government and philanthropic investment, especially compared to the elementary age programs and college and career access programs. And for over 45 years, we have focused on the middle grades here at Higher Achievement. We serve low-income students of color in 13 achievement centers from as far north as Baltimore and as far south as Richmond. Our 3 centers here in Richmond serve students from 16 different schools from all over the city. Our scholars and families interview to make sure that they are ready for the commitment that this program asks. Our model is broken into 3 parts: after school academy, summer support, and HSP, our high school placement programs. This totals more than 550 hours a year. Although our virtual program has modified our activities, our typical after-school program runs 4 nights a week with study hall, dinner, and mentoring. Our summer program focuses on family engagement with scholar-led conferences, college trips, and referrals to other programs, high-quality programs. For high school placement, we offer personalized coaching to prepare our scholars for competitive public and independent schools. We keep our scholars on track for college. We weave all of these elements into our model, and as we like to say, we are equal parts head and heart. It's a culture of high expectations, support, and preparing our scholars to be leaders. Internally measured, we know that our scholars are graduating from high school at rates far above their peers, and that they improve their report card grades every single year. And today, our briefing is certainly more head than heart, but to tell us more than that, I'd like to introduce our friend, Jean Grossman. Jean is a senior fellow in the K-12 education policy area for MDRC, a research firm focusing on building and applying evidence about changes in policy and practice that can improve the well-being of people who are economically disadvantaged. Jean is also a member of the faculty at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. Her publication list is about as long as my arm, and I urge you to visit their website to learn more about her. So take it away, Jean.
Thank you very, very much. First, this, as I told everyone before, this is how I do hard. So I was the principal investigator for 2 very, very rigorous studies of higher achievement. They're randomized control studies. Those are the same kind of studies we use to see if a drug is effective. The amazing thing is higher achievement is in a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of the world that has 2 of these rigorous studies that show it is effective. And because this is the gold standard type of evaluation, we know that higher achievement works as much as we know aspirin works. It's a complete proven fact. The 2 really big takeaways we found was, and that repeated itself in both studies, were that after 2 years, higher achievement improves the academic performance substantially of its students. In the first study, well, let me go through the history. So that's okay, yes, the history. So when we started back in 2006, at that time, the programs that existed out in the world and that had been evaluated, there had been no out-of-school time program that was not run by the school itself that was effective at increasing tests academic performance. And yet the potential of out-of-school time and nonprofits to do this work seems so great. And it was actually the W.T. Grant Foundation that really said, they were sure it could work. Let's find a model, a program that has all the components that we know should be in place to really solidify academic achievement. And so they went looking for a program with very strong curriculum, strong programming, a multi-year, which was critical, and good retention year to year. And higher achievement came up. And so we began a study of higher achievement back in 2006. And at the end of that study, we found that indeed 2 years after coming into the program, students had significantly better academic performance. At that time, we were only looking at test scores, since test scores were so important in the No Child Left Behind world. So what was seen is in the first year, there was very, very little movement, a little hint that the positive things were happening. And then the second year, it really banged in, and there was both increase in math and reading. In the first study, we also did a follow-up 4 years later, since the program is a 3 to 4 year program, depending on when you join. And we found that the program helps young people. Indeed, you know, again, proven that it helps young people get to more college-oriented schools. So that was really unusual. That was one of the first, well, it was the first study of a nonprofit to have that kind of effect. And it drew the attention of the US Department of Education. And it was sort of like, well, this looks great. Can you replicate? There are lots of programs who are good where they are, but they can't be replicated out beyond with fidelity and still having the impacts. So in 2015, the US Department of Education provided money to do a second RCT, a second rigorous study. At that time, we, between 2006 and 2015, it had become pretty clear that test scores are important, but really, if you want to look at what predicts kind of future earnings in the long run, it's really grades, not test scores, grades and attendance. And so we added to the study measuring what happens to grades. And again, we found exactly what we found in the first study. We found that after 2 years, grades went up, academic performance went up. In the first year, there was some hint that they were moving, and the second year that really moved. It is kind of interesting that Higher Achievement has a specific curriculum for math and reading in the after school, during the school year, and often has some kind of science when we were evaluating it, it had math, reading, and science in the summer. But you actually we found that grades went up in all the areas. So math, reading, social studies, science, almost equally. So it wasn't just about skills, it was about getting the young people excited about learning and learning how to learn and staying engaged in school. We also looked at subgroups, thank you. I think, so the big effect was that we had something called a positive effect on GPAs, on math, reading, social studies, and science. But what we also wanted to do is look at subgroups. Were there particular groups that of young students that the program worked really well for or didn't work so well for? And what we found, that were two really notable things we found, really the only two, was that it was very effective for boys, more effective for boys than girls. And that is really an important finding, since that generally academic programs tend to work with girls better than boys. So to have a program that really has such a big effect on boys is really notable. Their GPAs went up both in year 1 and in year 2. And the real difference between the girls and the boys really emerged in the second year in math. So math seemed to be really a big area for the boys. We also saw that the program works for the group of students it was designed for, which is students who are basically on grade level. It's not a remedial program. And so when students, it worked less well for students who were behind than students that were on grade level. For the on grade level, it really propelled them to excellence. Going to the next slide. As any good impact study, you should always be doing an implementation study at the same time to see what exactly what was on the ground when you were doing the study, what good stuff was happening that they should do more of, that the program should do more of, and what stuff was more challenging. So we kind of came up with 3 big areas of challenges. The challenge, so mentors are really key for higher achievement. The hope is that you'll have one mentor to say 3 or 4 scholars, and the mentor can help teach the scholar math, reading, do a variety of things. But it was really hard to do mentor recruitment. That won't be a surprise for anybody on this call, I'm sure. Mentor recruitment and retention is difficult. But the good news is they still, even with the trouble, there were still positive effects. We also know from many studies how important training is, especially ongoing training. And that's hard and challenging. Especially most of these volunteers were coming after work for 2 hours of volunteer work and wanted to go home afterwards. And to ask people to stay a half hour later or 15, 20 minutes more was not as attractive as one might hope. The programs across the cities that we were looking at the expansion came up with various workarounds, like putting things online, but there was less of it than the program had hoped for. But again, it was still effective. So it is a challenging area. One of the big surprises to me was I really had thought, I've done a lot of work on mentoring, that it was the mentors who were super critical to the program and for retention issues for the scholars. And what we found is, yes, mentors are important, but who is really important is the core staff. It's the center director and the volunteer coordinator or assistant director who's there every day, not just one day a week. There's every day. And while we were doing the study, they were also the staff for the summer. So this young people really formed relationships with those core staff. And we saw when one or more of those individuals left, scholar retention went way down, and also behavior deteriorated until the new staff member formed the relationships they needed to with the scholars. So it's a challenge for all out of school time programs because you try to really conserve your money and on staff in order to serve more young people. But there's a trade-off. You don't want to burn out your center director by having too many tasks on their plate. And that's what we saw, is most people were leaving because they just were putting in 80 hours a week, and on a sustained basis, that was too hard. So it's a choice that higher achievement and all out of school time executive directors need to think about. And then the last area was, while the after school academy was working with pretty high fidelity, the summer academy was not implemented at least as intended. It was a 5-week out of school summer program with like 6 to 6.5 hours a day that everybody was supposed to participate in. And it turned out relatively few scholars could make it, could either go at all or could go for the entire time. Families use the summer period to go to go see family or to do other, let their children do other activities. So while it ran, it was the weakest link, but again, the program still had impacts. So perhaps that was less critical a component. And also in the first study, we had actually done a little 1-year summer program study and found that there was no increase in academic ability over the 5 weeks. Now it's a short period of time, so it's hard to find. So that was another reason to say, well, maybe, let's think about what we do in the summer. So to remember that the bottom line is higher achievement works. It improves academic performance of students.
That's my favorite headline. So thank you, Jean. Jean, I got a question in the chat for you. Someone has asked, can you tell us more about what effect size means?
Oh, great question. Yes, I was going to skim over it, but you caught me. So an effect size is a measure very much like a percent change. It's just the standardized measure, but we don't have a feel for it. Most people don't, unless you're a researcher and read these kinds of things all the time. So I think the best way to describe it is, so if you say, we found that the impact on GPA, on grades averages, was 0.2. What does that mean? Is that big? Is it small? Well, if you look at the normal progress that a sixth grader makes when they finish sixth grade and move through seventh grade, so how much do they learn? How, what kind of percent change? What is the effect size for math and reading and science and social studies? And what you find is a rising seventh grader moves about 0.2 of a standard deviation in reading, and a 0.3 standard deviation, 0.3 effect size in math, and almost 0.3 in both science and social studies. So a 0.2 is a pretty substantial impact. It is close to like an extra year, at least for the rising seventh grader.
Great, thank you. And two more questions, and then we'll move on to our next section. The first one is from Evelyn Pollard. Did the summer program help retain student participation in the fall program?
No, it seemed pretty independent. The young people who didn't participate in the summer were just as likely to come back in the fall.
Great. And then from Scott Blackwell from the Community Foundation, interested in the success of boys, and was there any indication of what we could attribute that to?
What it seemed to be, so I'm going to give a mechanical answer, and because I don't really have a great substantive answer, maybe I'll let Katie figure that one out. Mechanically, what seems to be going on is boys are the students who most disengage with school during middle school. So what happens is they come in at fifth, they're learning math and reading, and they're doing, they're earning good grades and they're learning lots. And then sixth grade, middle school, late adolescence happen, and they're much more likely to be doing a nosedive. And higher achievement keeps them on the trajectory. And so what happens is, because the girls go down a little bit, but not so much, the boys nosedive. And so if you can keep boys on track, you have a real potential for great impacts. So one of it is sort of almost mechanical, but the reason most programs don't have effects for boys is because the boys drop out. And higher achievement is able, and I'll let Katie say how, to hold on to boys when many programs don't. And they may hold on to them for a year, but they don't come back. And as we know from the work, in 1 year, if you lose someone, you really haven't done very much. You need to retain them for year 2 and 3 to really have that effect. So I'll be quiet and let you tell, how do you retain your boys?
Thank you, Jean, for passing that off. And I would bring this back to the study. Honestly, we have that retention that we have in our center staff to really build those relationships. And frankly, the relationships that our mentors are also able to build with our scholars, I think has a tremendous amount to do with the retention of all of our scholars. They definitely see the impact when they are in the classroom, but I think they keep coming back because of those relationships and all the validation of that identity that they're building at that time. So thank you, Jean, and thank you for the questions, Evelyn and Scott. We want to talk now about how this has really impacted higher achievement already. So I'm going to introduce you all to somebody that most of you already know pretty well. Our very own Lindsay Wood Jeffries, CEO of Higher Achievement, to talk more about how we are using this already at Higher Achievement. Lindsay?
Thanks so much, Katie, and thanks everyone for making time today to hear about this study and hear how we're learning from it. The bottom line is what Jean already shared, is that this study demonstrates that our program works as shared by report card grades. And what's notable is that it's proven not only in our home base where we were founded in Washington, D.C., but in our expansion cities. And that is not something that every nonprofit has been able to show. And notably, it had strong results in Richmond. And these results are encouraging us to do more in partnership with all of you. We consider these positive study results in a really tumultuous time, a time when COVID-19 is ravaging communities of color, a time when 6 in 10 after-school programs have closed nationwide, a time when learning loss is estimated to be 12 months, and a time when staggeringly wide achievement gaps threaten to decline GDP by billions over time. And very importantly, a time of long overdue racial reckoning in our country, and I know also in the city of Richmond. Amid all of this volatility, higher achievement is stable, and we are looking for opportunities to grow, to serve more students within our schools and in our communities in partnership. Putting this research into practice is always what we seek to do. All those millions of dollars that have been poured into higher achievements research are for naught if we don't learn from it, and also if we don't share. And so with this research, especially the implementation study, it prompted us to come up with a new version of higher achievement, which we call Higher Achievement 2.0. It centers on what has always been a piece of this, which is college preparatory high school readiness and placement, by expanding our after-school academy by 7 weeks, by increasing the way we can engage families, and by partnering with summer programs like the WISE Power Scholars in Richmond. And by reorganizing our program team to support continual research practice loops so we can keep using data and research to inform what we're doing so we can better serve the scholars in our care. Like all of you, we have adapted radically during COVID-19. Our online program offers a streamlined version of what is higher achievement. And it consists of virtual math pods, kind of building off of that math strength, and also a need experienced by our scholars and shared by families and teachers. Mentoring in humanities and college, high school placement, and then social justice conversations, and internally within higher achievement, a racial equity plan. I must say, I am so proud of our Richmond team, some of whom are on this line today, and all of our supporters, but particularly our program staff, for their adaptability in this time and for the relentless focus and love for our scholars. As we look ahead to COVID educational recovery, we will continue to adapt. We were figuring out the ways in which we will adapt, but that will continue. And as we look ahead, we see reasons for hope. Hope in the resilience and brilliance of our young people. Hope that we will never take for granted the opportunity to learn and to laugh in person safely together. And hope that our communities will continue to lift one another up. As Amanda Gorman so beautifully stated yesterday in her inauguration poem, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So that is how I'm thinking about this work, applying research in this very unusual and tumultuous time, and continuing to do it in partnership with all of you so we can do right by our kids.
Thank you, Lindsay. Those of you who know us know that we are big fans of poetry here at Higher Achievement. And so Amanda's words were inevitably going to be with us today for sure. So thank you, Lindsay. I'd now like to introduce you all to someone that I think a lot of you already know too. I've had the pleasure of talking shop with Dr. Andrew Dare and was so delighted when he agreed to come here and do the same with you all today. Dr. Dare currently sits as the Dean of the School of Education at VCU. His expertise combines an academic and clinical background in counseling and psychology with more expertise in research. And he believes that research and instruction are at their best and most innovative when focused on serving the public. He certainly has the vitae to back that up. I am so pleased to have him with us today. Andrew?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you for everyone who is on this call. You know, as Katie mentioned, I'm a dean, but I think in the back of my mind, I still consider myself a researcher, although I'm not obviously as active with all of my administrative responsibilities. But I was quite excited to see a high quality randomized controlled trial study being done in a community organization that's serving underrepresented minority communities. Um, I grew up in the Orlando area and went to school and worked in that area. I was at University of Central Florida for 14 years, and what surprised me about Richmond compared to communities like Orlando is that there's significantly more philanthropic dollars here in Richmond. But what you see when there's so much philanthropic dollars is the bar, I guess, for accountability of those dollars is not as high, or the competition is not as high as it is in other communities. And so you don't see this type of randomized controlled trial study as often as we should. I've had the opportunity to work with MDRC. When I was at the University of Central Florida, I was PI on one of the sites for a multi-site national supporting healthy marriages project. So I'm well aware of the high standards and rigor of the work of MDRC. RCT studies are expensive, they're time consuming, and they're rigorous. However, our school children, particularly those who are in historically marginalized and are vulnerable due to poverty, racial inequity, and other issues, are without question worth this investment of time, effort, and resources. Student learning outcomes and graduation rates for our Black and Brown school children, particularly those living in poverty, are quite concerning in the Richmond area and in this region, and actually in our state. We also know that engagement in higher education is also less for underrepresented minority students, and again, for, particularly for those living in poverty. So this is important. This is important work, right? It's critically important work, and social services work and social justice work tends to be more emotional work, which is good. And so many people believe that their feelings about something being done is what matters most. Now, I'm not going to deny that. I think, for many of us who are on this call, there's a passion and a drawing and something emotional that draws us to this work. However, we need to ensure that when we're evaluating programs and talking about the impact of programs and making decisions on what we're going to do in our programs, that we're not just basing it on our feelings, that we're actually ensuring that we have strong empirical data to support the work that we do, to support the programs, to support the implications on generalizability and replicability of this work. And because we're making decisions that will have an impact on the lives of children, particularly vulnerable children, where if we're successful, there will be impacts. But if we're not successful, there will also be impacts. So we need to invest as Higher Achievement has done to really measure the effectiveness of our work. The Richmond education landscape benefits from the evidence-based work that is being done by Higher Achievement. And so it's quite exciting. We talk often at VCU, and I've said it quite often that, it concerns me that we don't have as many students from Richmond city schools that attend VCU. One would assume that a large percentage of our students come from Richmond City, and that's actually not the case. So, I'm excited about this work and really do hope that we begin to see the fruits of the great work that's being done. It's also important because this work is being done with middle school students, right? Helping to keep those students on track and engaged is incredibly powerful to impact our high school graduation rates. Underrepresented minority students and those living in poverty face a myriad of contextual challenges along with the normal challenges that exist for all middle school children, that exists for all middle school children. And so the additional interventions and opportunities for mentorship and academic and other supports that we see in higher achievement and their outcomes are critically important and beneficial. And let's not forget just how emotionally and developmentally, I'll say, challenging it can be for middle school students. So again, this work is critically important. And our middle school students oftentimes, I heard somebody, they're going to say it much more eloquently than I'm about to say it, but middle school students are not as cute as elementary school students, right? So a lot of people want to work with the elementary school students and the preschool students. Middle school students arguably is not as cute, but we can't forget about those middle school students, and so that support that they're providing and that investment, I think, is so critically important. The outcomes, seeing greater impacts with young boys, I think cannot be understated enough. We know, and if we don't know, you don't have to dig very hard to find data on the school to prison pipeline here in Richmond, here in our region, in the Commonwealth, and nationally. And a lot of that is with boys. And so it's especially important to see that we're having such strong outcomes with young boys. And so I think now is the time for youth serving organizations to really double down on strategies and practices, impactful, evidence-based strategies and impact and practices to make a meaningful impact on children's and families in our community. And it also needs to be done with a sense of urgency. I think sometimes we, and in academia, we are major culprits of this, where we feel being in committee and having a task force is actually doing something. We need real, practical, tangible work, innovative and impactful and evidence work being done with a sense of urgency. And I think this is what we're seeing here. And this is what we have that opportunity to discuss. This is a social justice issue. And those who know me and know my work are well aware of my passion in this area, especially in ensuring that children and their families have all the opportunities for academic, economic, and social mobility and advancements. But we don't often discuss the economic impact. And I think this was touched on before by some of my colleagues who spoke prior to me. I've attended two fascinating and equally concerning presentations from the Richmond Federal Reserve on the economic impact, particularly the lost economic impact in our region and in the country, because we need to do better in educating our underrepresented minority school children and those living in poverty. So yes, this is an educational issue. This is an equity issue. This is a justice issue. But let's not forget, this is also an economic development issue and an economic development priority for our region. So I'm really excited to see this work. I'm really proud of the work that is being done to impact the lives of our school children here. and just, you know, again, as an old research geek, just excited to see such an impactful, high quality, randomized control trial study, which is the gold standard in social sciences, to see that study done and to have these results. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It is a privilege to share the field with you. I will say that for sure. So thank you all. And thank you, Jean and Lindsay, and Andrew for sharing your thoughts on this study and our work here in Richmond. I agree with you, Lindsay. This is the hardest working team in show business. They're doing good work. So I'd like to open up for questions again, and I'd also like to volunteer some of our participants to also feel free to answer any of these questions, particularly my friend Tyron Frazier, who's with us today. For those of you who don't know, Tyron is one of my predecessors here at Higher Achievement. He was the executive director of Higher Achievement Richmond during this period of growth that the data was being collected for this report here in Richmond. Tyron is now with the Chesterfield Education Foundation and leading the charge there, but we are happy to have him here today. So if there are any questions about this period with Higher Achievement that Tyron can answer, I'm sure he would be happy to do so. He already said he would. But to get started, we did have one question in the chat for Dr. Dare. From Chanel Ebanks from the Greater Richmond Alliance for Out of School Time. So thank you, Chanel. She says, Dr. Dare, you touched on the emotional and developmental challenges that students face. Can you speak a little bit more about the SEL findings in this research?
So I was in the process of actually typing a response, but I think I would need to defer to Jean to really talk more about findings specific, but I do need one clarification if Chanel meant ESL, but I would need to defer to Jean to talk more details about the findings in the research.
So you can measure ESL growth and competencies and skills in many different ways. That field is actually really just taking off now. So at the time in 2015, what we did is by including grades, and especially grades in combination with attendance, is a good measure of social emotional competence. It's been found that young people who have the ability to pay attention, stay focused, be persistent, and a lot of the self-control and social competencies reflect back onto grades. So while we didn't measure, say, persistence or grit or growth mindset explicitly, the fact we found positive grades is probably related to the fact that higher achievement, and during the study, there was really a focus on developing social emotional competencies among the scholars, and it seems effective between the academic and the ESL stuff that was happening. Grades did go up, which seemed to be a reflection of improved social emotional competence.
Great. Thank you, Jean. We have another question from Frank Cardella with United Way. And Frank has a great intro to his question. I would urge you all to take a look, but I'm going to summarize the last point here. With mentor and core center staff retention so instrumental to scholar success, what is needed to make longer term commitments more attractive? Does the data implicate any specific priorities to that end? Lindsay, would you like to take that?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'll start on the staff front, and I'll share staff and mentor, and then Jean, feel free to share from the research view. On staff retention, this is something, center staff retention in particular, is something that we have tried to focus on a lot at Higher Achievement over the years. Tyron will remember this. Back in 2016, we did a compensation study of higher achievement and found that across the board, we were not compensating staff at even close to the market level for nonprofits in the communities that we serve. So just on that baseline, we looked across our organization and said, what are the highest leverage positions that lead to outsized impact on scholar outcomes? Because we couldn't just afford to bring everybody up to the 50 percentile at the same time, unfortunately. And center directors were top of that list, because the stronger, there's all kinds of regression analysis we've done internally, obviously supported by the external research that shows that is the key, that if you had just one key, that's the key to scholar retention. And so we increased salaries back then. We continue to review them. I think the other things that we've invested in that are supportive of staff retention are teaching management skills. Many of the staff at Higher Achievement are managers for the first time while working here. And the single biggest contributor to someone staying in a job or leaving a job tends to be your relationship with your manager, regardless of sector. And so we have invested in every manager going to the management center training, and then support management practices around that. I will say three things that we're trying now around staff support and retention are creating sort of more opportunities for staff agency in the bigger decisions strategically the organization is making, more time to plan and be thoughtful. The previous calendar before Higher Achievement 2.0 of Higher Achievement is exhausting, right? It is, there are very few, maybe 2 weeks out of the year where you're sort of on autopilot and you're not sort of running one academy while thinking about the other. So the change we made in the summer to partner with other programs like the Y in summer enables more time for planning and more time to engage families. And the other piece that we hear often, and it is again a kind of an economic question that we are always wrestling with, is how do we bring in more high quality part-time staff? That is to lower ratios and to distribute the work effectively. That is not something that we have fully cracked the nut on, but that certainly supports staff retention. On mentor retention, I would just say perhaps paradoxically, having high standards for volunteers tends to lead to more retention. I remember years ago when we said, oh, there's this research, actually, Carla Herrera, one of our other researchers, one of her studies showed that you have a negative impact on a young person if you have less than a year relationship with them, because there's just one sort of another sort of adult coming in and out of your life. And so we said to our mentors, we only want you to stay if you can stay with us for over a year. And I was so nervous at the time that we would not have enough people who would commit. And we actually had more people commit because we raised the bar, because volunteer time is precious and mentors want it to be well used. I would say also training, connections among mentors. So there's like a kind of social connection there, having the same scholars week after week, seeing that their work is impactful. I would welcome any thoughts from Jean and also from Mary Lloyd, who's the chair of our advisory board, who is, I believe, our longest tenured mentor in Higher Achievement Richmond, and one of the longest tenured in the whole organization.
I will actually defer because I'd love to hear. You basically said everything that mentoring research supports. So you said it, so I'll be quiet for now.
Well, I'll just agree with what Lindsay said. And I think there needs to be a way to communicate to potential mentors the value of consistent commitment. And I'm not sure exactly how you do that other than having current mentors speak what they know about their relationships and the success of their groups and their scholars. It really is true, I think, for mentors as well as scholars, that the effectiveness of that relationship exponentially increases with the length of time that it goes on. My first group of middle school scholars are I think I started mentoring them when they were in 6th grade, and they're now the age of 2nd-year college students. Some of them are still in college, some of them are pursuing other career paths, but I have been able to stay in touch with 3 out of the 4 for all these years. I still get random text or pictures, and that means a lot to me. And even though an hour or 2 a week seems like a very light touch during the busy, chaotic years of middle school, they still say that their time at Higher Achievement and the relationships they had with their mentors really affected them, and they feel like helped them stay on the paths that they're on. So it's definitely an issue to try to get people who can stick with it. But sometimes in the need of the moment, you have to fill up your ranks. And I'd like to hear if anybody has other suggestions on how to do it. I think really it's just preaching of the old mentors, trying to intrigue people. It's hard the first year, it gets better the second year, it gets better the third year. So I don't really have a solution, but I know it's true.
I think Jean had a quick follow-up to that, and I think you're right, Mary Lloyd. I think it's that head plus heart that we keep talking about. Like, it's true, and we have the data to show that, but you also feel it when you're in front of them.
So I just wanted to jump in. Besides after out of school time programs, my other real specialty is mentoring programs. And it is a really, really common thing for the mentors to say, when we interview the mentors and mentees separately, not at Higher Achievement, but in just in general, mentors will say, I'm not really connecting. I don't think the young person really thinks of me as, I'm really connected to them, but I don't really think they are. Then you go talk to them, to the young people, and like, oh my God, this is the most important person to me. This is the person, I can't go talk to my mom, but I can talk to this. They really understand. So they never communicate that to the mentor. So even though you think your mentee doesn't think it's very important, it is. And often they're just not showing you that love directly because they're a little afraid of what the reaction might be. So
that's middle school.
It's middle school, exactly. You don't. And I too had exactly, an hour a week. I thought I did a really major study on the impact of mentoring, and we had massive effects of good, strong mentoring really improves lots of things. And then I realized, because I had little kids, how many times do I spend 1 hour really paying attention for a full hour to my child, which is not, because I'm doing all these other things. So an hour can be an amazing gift.
It's really true. Thank you, Jean, for that follow-up. I have one quick question before we wrap up, and that is to our friend Tyron. And so Jean mentioned early on in her presentation earlier that when any program expands or moves to a different city, there's a huge fear that the program will not take as well in the new community. And so Tyron was really at the forefront of that, along with his predecessor, Eleanor Coetzee. Tyron, can you speak to any of the challenges or real glimmers of hope that you had during that expansion period while all this data was being collected?
Yeah. Thank you, Katie. And again, congratulations, Higher Achievement and Higher Achievement Richmond. Higher Achievement Richmond, especially because this is your 10th year anniversary from launching in the city of Richmond. So congratulations to you all. Look, I think I got most of my gray hair around expansion time for Higher Achievement. Had a really big afro. No, I'm just kidding. But it was a little bit nerve-wracking. And the conversation initially started with the advisory board in Mary Lloyd's living room as we were talking about expanding to 2 new communities while we were, just a couple of years into our work with Richmond Public Schools at Henderson and Bouchard. And we knew with the expansion came an opportunity to serve more scholars, but also how we would get the work of the study done, especially the recruitment. It was hard. It was double recruitment. You talk about a new center that required 60 new young people, 5th and 6th graders into that. That became, one new center was a recruitment effort of about 120. That's like 240 kids that we needed to recruit during that time, and it became all hands on duty. I know some of the staff members remember or try to really forget what some of those things that occurred, because it was hard. One of the things about the interview portion or the recruitment portion of Higher Achievement is that you begin to build relationships from that interview, because you're required to have an adult there that is a person that has a strong interest in that young person, but then also the student, the potential higher achievement scholar, and that's where the relationships are built. And so we built a lot of relationships during that time, but and we were also concerned that we wouldn't be able to keep half of those relationships because half of those kids would not be allowed to participate in higher achievement. So that was very, I think, probably one of the things that we dealt with a lot to try to make sure we can meet that target number and then implement the program with fidelity. And the team, just as they do, I'm sure today, worked very hard to make sure that we can give the full scholar experience for all of our families and all of our students and all of our mentors, to get them engaged and to build them up with higher achievement culture that exists still today and existed for so many years. But mentors are key in that. Our volunteers, were definitely key in making sure that we could keep them, especially during the school year. And the staff and the support from the national team and our school districts were also key in making sure we could operate the program with fidelity and build those relationships. But yeah, that was it was something to remember. Let me say that. So.
Well, thank you, Tyron. I thank everybody for everybody on this call. So many people on this call were so integral in sort of paving the way for the success we're having even in this really challenging year. So this concludes today's briefing. We are always happy to talk more about our work, and I'll be following up with many of you in the coming weeks. But until then, as I mentioned before, you'll see the link for the full report in your mailbox. And I did want to leave with one brief anecdote from our center director at Binford, Ronee Davis. Ronee told us earlier today about one of her alumna, Melina. Melina is now a thriving high school student at Community and doing so well. And soon after she started at Community, like soon after she started Community, she reached out to Miss Ronee to ask how she could help. She is a leader. This is the first indicator we have when scholars reach back and figure out how they can help more scholars. She knew that this help was and is critical, and she became the kind of leader that we all hope to see. And she's also focused on her service hours. Make no mistake. But that reminds us of Melina's focus on her high school graduation and her future. And so we're so proud of Melina. We're so proud of Miss Ronee, and we're so proud of everybody who really helped to make this such a success. So thank you again for supporting Higher Achievement. This report tells me, and I hope you also, that the decision to bring Higher Achievement to Richmond was the right decision. And then we will carry on the success for many years to come. So thank you and have a terrific afternoon.